really do a very fine line between making it preachy and at the same time being very true to the genre. And I mean, this is me. I just love what I'm doing, and I'm an artist who's turned publisher, and I love what I'm doing here.
Great. Next one, Cassia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cassia Curran. I'm an advisor at Wings Interactive. Wings Interactive is a microfund that invests in games made by women, by diverse teams. What sets Wings Interactive apart is that the main decisions are made by a board of successful female game developers who all evaluate the games that are pitched to the board. And that is a huge difference in the games industry, where 88% of investors present as male. We've invested in games such as Lord Winterbottom Investigates, Later Daters, Pushy Pulley, and a lot of these games are pushing the envelope in terms of representation and diversity in the games, and that is coming from a truly authentic place.
Anat.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. I'm from Israel. I consider myself as a social entrepreneur and a women's rights activist. Before I started Toya, I was the founder and director of Israel Women's Film Festival, who worked to change the representation of women filmmakers in my country. And 4 years ago, I started Toya. We are a female-led studio based in Tel Aviv, but with women working with us also from Europe. And basically what we do is develop games to empower a growing female user base, as we still feel like we're an underserved demographic, and we want girls to experiment with decision-making, planning, strategy, and so forth, just like boys do. And so this is why we started Toya, and we focus on creating those games on Roblox platform.
Antonia.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. Nice to be with you guys here. Bit like several of you, I haven't started out in the games industry. I started out as a conflict and war journalist and covered conflicts around the world, particularly in the Middle East. And I have been in Israel as well, and then Southeast Asia. So coming from that sort of subject, I'm very passionate about conflict. From there, it led me into games, particularly since I was curious about how powerful experiences could shape our view of the world and how we learn. And games are the territory or the turf where we create the most powerful experiences, more powerful than any classroom could provide. And so today I'm the CEO of Kite Strategic Adventures and a number of other companies, and we're developing training and simulations, bringing together basically the best of neuroscience, psychology, high performance, and games. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great, and I'll be your moderator for today. My name is Tsahi, and I'm from Israel as well as Anat. I've been dealing with game development and game design for the last 16 or 17 years, mostly in the educational territories, creating games for children, dealing with conflict management as part of the Association of Games for Peace, which we won the United Nations Prize in 2017. And I'm always striving, to make this world a little better, if it's working with immigrants or working with children with disabilities. So that's always something that I push forward. And, that was us. I would like to present the first question. So I would like to hear how each of you created a change using your daily work and your vision forward. Please give us one good example from your work and what you did to create that change, and what led you choose that way over other ways to develop games or to develop other genres. Let's start with Antonia.
Okay. I think we're an interesting example with how we work, because a lot of our work is not funded through the games industry. It's not classical games industry, but we're coming from the technical and the design approach of games. And the first ever game I was involved in, and we built with our team, was very, very experimental because we had very little experience with how to actually make games. But we had a lot of experience with the subject matter, a bit like, Leena, what you said about your background, knowing a lot about conflict. And so we tried to translate years of experience of how conflict happens and evolves into a game to make that possible to experience. So our first game was developed in collaboration with the German government. And that was in 2014, was the first launch with several updates following. And the game until today still runs as a key training and assessment tool for people going into peacebuilding work internationally. So that was the first kickoff. And interesting was that the feedback we're getting is that it doesn't only give them knowledge and a sense of experience, but it actually shifts how we see and perceive conflict. So it really impacts thinking and our capability to deal with very complex scenarios. And that was a discovery we made in the process and which we were really excited about.
Nice. Anat?
I think that, for me, it's about the small changes in representation in life in general. So it's always about what do I see when I go into this or that game? Because as a girl and as a boy, it would make a whole difference if I go into a farming game and I would also see some female farmers. So when we started creating a farming game, it was like going and watching and listening to what was happening on the platform and also in other, farming games and mobile industry and figuring out what would be the best way, to change representation in a way that it's even in the smaller nuance, so kids would notice that and how much of an effort it would take from us. And I think that, creating different female farmers representing Asia, Russia, Arab countries, not just the US, made kids, and I know that because we were talking to them on the chat and they were going into the game and saying, like, wow, look, there are like female farmers in the game. And they were talking about it with each other and they were so surprised. And it's not like it was even, a very sophisticated character that was talking or something, just very small texts. But it was overwhelming for them because it was about, okay, there's a farming game and you have female farmers. And for me, I think it was a point where I was, okay, you don't have to go full power in. You can start with very small, minor changes to make it represent, the world as a whole.
Leena, do you have anything to add on that?
Of course, I mean, talking about diverse games, I'm living in. Talking about me doing what I'm doing is because I'm from a very diverse background myself. And, the greatest example for me is, of course, the Missing Game for a Cause. Itself is a very unique game for the world and let alone India. And it's tackling a very different issue like trafficking, which is unheard of. It's a dark issue. And we've seen a tremendous response because it's had this amazing worldwide reaction to it, where we've had players kind of so passionately giving us reviews about, it being such a unique game and make a game too. And the kind of reactions we've received is tremendous. And dealing with the topic, the reason why we did it, being successful with it, putting the player in the feet of the victim. It totally tells me that it's a very good example and it can be done and it should be done more and it should be done better. And we need more of diverse games here.
Okay. Cassia?
So the approach that Wings Interactive takes is really from the investment point of view. So it's really about enabling creators that come from underrepresented backgrounds in the games industry to be able to accomplish their vision. The impact that the fact that so much of the money in the games industry is controlled by like a certain really quite narrow demographic means that the kind of games that are funded, are successfully marketed, often reflect a certain point of view. And in order to challenge that, one of the most effective ways is essentially by allocating investing funds in games that that are made by creators from underrepresented backgrounds. And we think that has, firstly, gives us better returns because there's all these untapped talent that could create fantastic, successful games if they had easier access to funds. And it also, secondly, it means that the player base, or a huge amount of this player base of gamers are from backgrounds that are not represented by the people in the games industry, by investors in the games industry. And we discovered that there is this demand, as Anat was saying, for authentic representation of themselves in the game, of their backgrounds, their experiences.
Thank you. For our next question, in your experience, can any game or any game genre promote or include social change and diversity elements? And why should we even care or consider this as creators? Why should we emphasize social change and diversity? Let's start with Anat.
So for me, the answer is yes. We need that. We're like 50% of the population, even a bit more, and we're still, being overlooked. So for me, it starts with the question of who is thinking about the end user. Who is the one who is sitting around the table and designing the game, and who is the user they have in mind? So I think that traditionally it was like a group of male-dominated surrounding tables that were talking about what we want or didn't even think about what we want. And for me, it's about, having a diverse team would actually mean that we would be thinking about, different people, different kids, representing different worlds and ethnicities. And it would then make a difference in the AAA games or in the indie games. It wouldn't even matter in which game we're talking about, because it's all about who is sitting in the room and designing the games. And so I think that diversity in games starts with diverse companies. And it would be extremely hard to change that before the other thing changed. And I feel like we're on the verge of this change. When we started Toya, we're like, I think we still are probably a minority of female-led studios, but I've seen over the past 2-3 years that are more now. And every year there are like 2-3 more adding. So I feel like a change is occurring, but it's going to take some time.
Okay. Leena?
For me, when you ask us, can any game or genre really promote, I would say we can. For me, when I've come in as a kind of literally an outsider who stepped in, I'm very excited to see the different genres games have. And especially the role-playing genre for me is very exciting, especially in the social change space. And so I feel it's really important to understand the dynamic of the genre and how we can use it to tell the narratives we want to. And it can be done really well. And so it's really important that we begin to conceptualize the game, tweak it according to the genre, and make the narrative what we're bringing onto the table. It has to fit within the layers, the complexities of the gameplay. And eventually, like it said, right, everything, even a game, is actually just a text. So, and it's actually a social phenomena, and it's a reflection of what we see, how we see it. So just like that, every game can actually offer good or bad. And it's always a learning curve with the game. So, we all should consider it. We have to explore this. It's a very exciting space. And like somebody said, I think we're still in the silent movie era of game development, game stories. There is lots to be done in this space, and lots of more narratives to be explored.
Cassia.
So in terms of, why should we care about diversity and having a social impact with our games? I'll leave the I think you can talk about the moral aspects of this in great depth, but as a businesswoman, I would say that this is an area that you can't really afford to ignore when it comes to development of games. And I would very much apply that to absolutely all teams in the games industry, from AAA down to small indie teams, solo developers. The reason is because no matter what your game is, it will still, it's a cultural product. It will have some sort of social impact. The whole point of a game is essentially to give players an experience, and there's very small decisions that you might make. For example, having the character customization, the default character be a white male. That is inherently like participating in the status quo. So the choice to have the default character be a black woman, that is, you have to make these choices, and they do have an impact upon the players. And I think that it is very much clear in the past year, particularly with the Black Lives Matter protest, which has been the most successful protest in the USA in the USA's history, that audiences are becoming more and more alert to matters of diversity, alert to matters of social impact. You will have blowback from players if you make choices, in game design choices that are counter to that are helping the oppression, shall we say, of certain demographics, oppressed minorities. So, and then from a opportunity perspective, that's also something. It's a challenge, but there is definite opportunity for games that explore social impacts to be financially successful. I think that the biggest example of this, or the outstanding example of this, is probably going to be This War of Mine by 11-Bit Studios in Poland, that explored the experience of war from a civilian's perspective, using survival, resource management, game mechanics. And that sold 4.5 million copies. And there's plenty of other games, like AAA games, for example. The Last of Us 2 has a transgender character that spoiler alert, doesn't die, which is usually what happens to transgender characters in recent media. There again, Don't Nod Entertainment, maybe you could say that is a AAA or high-end indie studio. Tell Me Why, again, has like a main character who's a transgender man. There is a very strong trend, shall we say, in the games industry of being more socially aware and more and showcasing diversity.
Antonia.
Yeah, I think I would like to build a bit further on Cassia's line of argument here. I think the question is not so much if we can make and should make games for social change, but the question is, can we make games that don't affect social change one way or another? Because we are creating experiences, and any experience we're making goes into our repertoire of information, how we make sense of the world as people. And by now, neurologically and psychologically, it is proven that our brains treat an imagined experience, if it's intense and very engaging, pretty much the same way as a real experience. So our brains process this, embed it, and at some point, the barrier between real and game-based experience starts blurring. And I don't want to go into this whole discussion around violence in computer games, because we're not talking about a one-on-one connection. So it's not the discussion about, oh, do violent computer games make you violent? Yeah, I play a shooter, so tomorrow I go out with a shotgun. We all know it doesn't work like that. It's not that simple. It's much more interesting. But it means that, as Cassia stressed already, any kind of experience shapes us, and particularly one where we are so emotionally engaged as in games. And so we as developers have a responsibility to take control and make conscious decisions about the impact of our games, and not just let that happen by default or by industry standard or by habit, because that reinforces old formats, old stereotypes, biases, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a great opportunity. And it's also a great opportunity, I think, from a business point of view, and that's why it's coming more and more into play, because it opens a lot of new playgrounds. And we're not just all building the 25th wild male lead character first-person shooter running through a tunnel level or something. Yeah, so we have much more storylines at our disposal. We have much more interesting mixes of characters. So it just really mixes the whole scenery up and gives us a lot to play with.
Great, thank you. Let's speak a little bit on the term a niche. So games depicting diversity and social change are often considered as an alternative genre. So how can we transcend this label and become mainstream? Let's start with Leena. I'm sure she has a lot to say about that.
Actually, I mean, they won't be so diverse if we make more of them. And of course, they have to be commercially viable, which I think they are. Like already Antonia was saying, that there has been a shift, and I mean, people are wanting to have more different experiences in the game space. Just like we've seen it in other entertaining spaces like cinema and news or music. So we've seen an alternative coming in all these genres, and I feel that the time for probably alternative. Let's hope we don't have to call them alternative for too long. The different style of narratives coming out onto the gaming space more now, and we have to really boil down to it being people being exposed to more such narratives, more such stories, and more such gameplays, and demanding more of them, because if they are commercially viable, maybe that the circle will go in the other side, and they'll be say, hey, there is more requirement for more genres which are dealing with these different issues or stories. And I think it's all about really bridging the gap and creating more of these narratives and stories, and getting more audiences exposed to it, and so the audiences then ask more for it, and so that the commercial viability also becomes, and they don't remain alternative. A very good example, I would say, even in the film genre, would be a Kubrick. I mean, he's alternative, but still he's mainstream. I mean, people want to experience different kind of films, which are not so mainstream, and so it's a great possibility there.
Antonia?
Yeah, I think we're looking at two different tracks here. One is bringing more diversity into the games industry as it stands, into the different genres, broadening our storylines, broadening the experiences, the characters, etc. So that's track one. Track two is really developing games with a social intent, so with a social purpose, something to teach, to inform, to create particular experiences, to affect a certain change of mind, change of mindsets, change of perception in our players. So I think those two are very, very different kind of challenges for us. The first one is a mainstream challenge anyway, because we're talking about the games industry at large, so taking control of our impact. The second one is what is at the moment still the niche, very much. And I think games that do have an intent, they are by design a little bit niche, because they're not entertainment games. But how broad that niche goes, or how close it gets, or how blurry it gets with the entertainment, I think depends on two things. One is the quality as a game. So not just the quality of getting the message across and the quality in terms of a social instrument for change, but the quality of the hardcore aspects of games development. So in our work, even early on, but particularly now since we are more established and we have access to the respective funding, we say we build AAA games, or that's the ambition. Yeah, to build something that looks AAA, that has the quality of AAA, or to build something that looks like a really, really cool indie game. So it doesn't have to be all sort of in that particular corner of AAA, but something that values the classical standards of really good games design, good graphics, engaging gameplay, so powerful experiences. I think one of the reasons why social change games initially were a bit looked at, or skeptically looked at, was that they were so lightly funded that the games developers had to make do with just sort of the minimum they could get away with. And so they're associated with being sort of simple, focused very much around the central message. But the more we come out of that niche, the more we claim our space, the more opportunities are opening up, and it's great to hear that that some of the investors are also getting into this now. The better our games get, and the more impactful they get, because when the experience is exciting, the learning or the discovery in the game is great as well. And so I think pushing quality is a key issue, a key challenge for all of us in the process. And not just saying, oh, we're doing this because we want something good, and so you have to live with a sort of simplest possible way of realizing it.
I couldn't agree more with Antonia. In fact, I would almost like push it a bit further. I think it's almost fatal to, if you're looking at like educational games, they don't tend to do very well. They don't tend to take off and really achieve like mass penetration of the market. And I would challenge anyone who is deliberately going as the main focus, trying to make a game that's going to make a social impact. Because if you don't make ensure that the game is like a really good, as an enjoyable, entertaining, or engaging game, then you will never get a mass audience, and then naturally the impact of your game, the impact that you're trying to achieve, social impact, is going to be limited, because very few people will want to play a game that they might, you might consider to be, well, dull, worthy, like good for you. No one wants to play games because they're good for you. It's essentially about, it's usually about escapism in some respect, or, being immersed in a completely different world, or having like a new and fresh experience. Games don't always have to be like, fun, happy times. I think this war of mine is quite, it's quite a harrowing experience. And in fact, there's lots of horror games, which, it's not exactly, like cheerful. But, I think it's, as Antonia said, you really have to focus upon the quality. You have to focus upon like the game mechanics, and hit the quality bar as much as possible across all the different areas: audio, art, marketing, everything. I would say that the entertainment side is like the vehicle in which you can push a social impact message. I think that for a lot of gamers, a lot of players, the social impact aspect of things is kind of a nice to have, or it's something that makes the game cool and interesting and different. But very few gamers will just play a game because, for the pure social impact element. I think that's really challenging to get mass adoption.
Anat, do you have anything to add on that?
I don't think so. I totally agree with that. I think it starts with being entertaining, and not with, and I do think that once you're here for the good, then you have that built in almost in you and in your team. So have the confidence in yourself and your team that you would make a game that would include all the elements by the end of the day, but would be engaging and interesting enough to become a really successful game.
Okay.
So can I just pitch in one line in addition to that? I think one of the strongest counter forces to really getting the value up of social impact games is actually what we now know as gamification. Because gamification is a term that is very much raiding some of the tools of games design and chucking it onto marketing messages. And it basically ruins the idea of game, and it sends the message that anything that has a purpose beyond entertainment is a leaderboard and some random tags and buttons and prizes or so, coins attached to it or so. And I think that's not what we're all about. We're really about creating great experiences, great games, something fun to play, and not just spicing up sort of moral messages.
I totally agree. If I can shove in, you would see that in educational games, as you mentioned, Cassia, because most of the educational games that I see, not all of them, there are high quality ones, but most of them are not very visually attractive. They are not polished enough as, regular games. And when you market a game as mainly an educational game, it's an off for most of your crowd. And you would see that. How many YouTubers can you count that are, their main focus is educational games or social change or diversity? So I gather that most games have diversity or social change elements. It can start from how you stigmatize your villains or enemies in a shooter game. Mostly, for many years it was either the Russians or Muslim or other minorities. And you would see that in MMORPGs or fantasy games, when, speaking about armor parts of female characters and taking that to the edge. So I think as a developer, and as a game designer, as a game creator, we have a responsibility. First of all, the game has to be fun. Of course, it has to be engaging. And secondly, we have to think about our responsibility of what we want to, transfer to our audience as creators, if it's in the narrative design, the story that we enter our audience. And I'm not referring to lecturing which ideals should the audience follow, but yes, we have an obligation to show a more, whole world with, gender equality, more sensitivity to other ethnicities and the sorts, but not in a way that our player feels like it's pushed up its throat. So that's my take on that. If we already spoke about games as a business unit, so let's speak a little bit about the business model. So creating social change games often sounds like some kind of an adventure where the business model is like a mystery. Nobody understands that. You would look on KPIs and it's sometimes horrific, specifically in mobile. And you would see many developers and creators a little bit intimidated from that and also frustrated that they cannot really find any publisher they try to pitch that idea to. And of course, I know Cassia has something to say about that. Where do we find those elusive, those interesting publishers like yourself, or how do we survive with a social change themed game until we break through?
I definitely feel like you can't really approach it in like, oh, I've got a social impact themed game and now I'm going to go and find funding for this. I think you really have to approach it from like, I have a simulation game that mimics the raising of a Lebensborn child, like my child's Lebensborn, and I think that this particular platform, like whether it's PC or console, probably not mobile, is going to be the best. Like so much of your business model, whether it's like free to play or premium, that is going to depend upon the game mechanic that you have. And I think the game mechanic can be anything when it comes to social impact. From a technical perspective, I feel from like a game design technical perspective, I think that anyone making a game with strong social messages really has to think very hard and pay particular attention to making sure that the game mechanics match very well with the message that they're trying to deliver. So I mentioned My Child Lebensborn, which is a game about raising a child of a Nazi soldier in Norway, and that utilizes a ton of like your classic simulation, like sort of Sims-like simulation. Where you're having to make sure the child is fed at certain times. You have to make sure that the child goes to school at the right times, and you're making all these different choices. What game mechanic you have there is going to really impact upon what kind of what kind of business model you have, and the business model and platform is going to impact what kind of investors that you can access. I don't think that any for-profit investor is really just going to invest in a game that is main ideal is to have a social impact, because it's a bit of a red flag almost, that you're focusing upon, like, almost like virtue signaling, how wonderful you are for thinking about these things, rather than thinking about really engaging as many players as possible and making as much profit as possible. So I think a lot of for-profit investors would have a hard time investing in that kind of game. On the other hand, there are quite a lot of government grants out there that are very much well inclined to invest in these kind of social impact games. There are some trusts, some funds that are like charitably led. There is actually quite a lot of different opportunities, and I think you could probably approach both. I would, for your typical sort of games industry investor, really highlight how great your game is. And then for the non-game industry investors that have more of a social impact, of course, you're focusing more on the kind of potential social impact that you have. So I think it is a challenge. But making games is incredibly hard, as we all know. So, and making social impact games is even harder.
Anat?
I totally agree with the approach that Cassia just shared. We have raised from both gaming investors and not gaming investors, impact investors. But I think there's a third opportunity and possibility here. And since the user-generated content platform emerged and they're becoming very big, then you don't need a lot of capital now in order to go and do your game. So you can go and develop on Roblox, you can go and develop on Minecraft, you can go and develop on Manticore, and there are others that are joining. So like very short cycles of development, low cost, and I think it's a great opportunity even to create a demo before going to investors later on. And I think it's a game changer actually for people who want to create games regardless if they are diversified or impactful or whatever. I mean, it's a really game changer because it is open for everyone, and everyone can go in and, create their own games and share their ideas. And I think that it is making it much, much easier than to approach an investor and say, listen, this is what I've created, this is the experience we have online, this is the traffic, this is the engagement. And then you would have an argument that even if you didn't create a game before and your games have this or that metrics, you would find that they would lessen. And you would even probably be able to raise if your KPIs are, doing well enough. So I would consider that as well. This is what we did, by the way. We partnered with the biggest platforms, also going back to the former question about mainstreaming social impact. I think this is one of our strategy, thinking about how can we reach a massive user base in an organic way. And we found the UGC platform, to enable that. So I would encourage others to do so.
Oh, that's a very cool approach. I think that's really awesome way to iterate design very fast and get your game, your MVP out onto the market as soon as possible. Yeah. I thought of something as well from a fundraising perspective. I very much like it when I see that a game has money from or is applying for a government grant of some description or some sort of any kind of free money is often pretty nice for me as someone who actually invests in largely for a profit, or at least we're looking to make our investments profitable or break even, because that lessens the risk for us quite dramatically. And then often you'll find that government investors, government grants are more likely to be given to games that have some games industry backing, because that's a marker of quality. So sometimes you have a bit of a chicken egg problem for game developers, but if you can get past the first hurdle, then it can be quite good and smooth sailing.
Yeah, I think there's another interesting aspect, because we're talking a bit here about getting out of the niche, but I think we can also make the niche our leverage. Because when I look at now our experience as a company, our latest project runs on a mixture of an epic mega grant and public funding by the German government at the moment, plus private funding from the owners of the company. So it's really a mix. But we have not had a single game funded from a classical games investor yet, because most of the games investors shy away, not because of the game, but because they say the market we're tackling is a market they don't understand. So because we're niche, we're not looking necessarily at the mainstream entertainment market as our audience, but looking at, for example, with the latest project, any kind of organizations who face the challenge of having to perform under pressure. So this could include firefighters, police, the military, peace builders, humanitarian aid organizations, but also I don't know, at the moment in the COVID situation, all the health services. So suddenly we have a huge market that is a very non-traditional gamers market. And that doesn't only pose challenges, but it also opens new funding streams, because in all of these sectors are organizations who do fund in one shape or form. And with making the social aspect or the impact aspect we're trying to aim for the flagship of the project, and then bringing the high quality games as the differentiator, we are interesting as an investment project for very different investors than we would be classically. So it opens a lot of new opportunities from that perspective as well. And I think the games industry for the last decades, it has been very much in the box. So it has been in the beginning very niche, very nerdy, and very powerful within that. But we sort of created within our own space. That has changed over the last years. So the games industry has really broken out of that confinement, and it's putting tentacles into all sorts of other sectors. Teaching and learning was one, social impact. So there's so many different areas, simulations, technical simulations. The lines, the boundaries are really breaking away by the day. And that opens lots of new spaces for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just have two bits to add to this, actually, because I'm actually not a publisher and I've just had 2 games yet. But I've been the way Anat said, so just do it. And looking for alternative fundings. And both my games have been developed through crowdfunding. And the first one was a much smaller game, and the game 2 we did was one of the only really successful Kickstarters from India. And we are really looking at quality, and we are looking at an amazing gameplay and the whole research and everything. But what we are really looking at is seeing how this particular section really has a life in India, in the Indian gaming scenario. And there is so much to be done in this space. And we've been moving very intuitively. So far, so good, but we're waiting to see what happens.
Thank you. So we are almost at our last question. So let's sum it up. What advice would you give to those, fresh or a little bit more veteran game developers, game creators that are either working or planning their next game that will include diversity or social change elements? What advice would you give them as a studio or for their game, getting funding for the future? Let's start with Antonia.
I think I would stay away from any technical advice because we all know what we're doing to a degree and always learning new stuff on the go. But I think the advice I would give is to be brave, to be daring, and just to saddle the ponies and ride out into that uncharted territory and claim it. Because I think at the moment what we see, particularly in the space of immersive technologies, is that where the games industry doesn't put a foot down and say, this is our territory, we're the experts on this, other companies pop up. And they might not have the skills, they might not have the storytelling capabilities, but they find people to build stuff. And then we are losing access to that, or we're losing the lead on it, where we are naturally at home. So I think uncharted territory is great. It's what we want to explore, and we just have to go for it and enjoy the process and not be afraid all the time to do something new or different or try something.
Anat?
I totally agree with that. Just go ahead and do that, share your story. But I think before you share your stories, know who you want to share it with. Because sometimes we feel like we should go and pitch our story to the biggest publishers there are, and we are so wrong. We need to look around us and see who would be the best fit for us, not if we would fit them. It's also about us and who would find interest in what we're doing and finance that and work with us and would be a good colleague for us to work with. Because it's not just about raising funding, it's also about, collaboration. And then when you do have finance, who are you working with? Do you like working with them? So I would encourage you to do your homework before that. Do a mapping almost of, before approaching. But go ahead and there. Don't wait and say, I'm not ready, I'm not prepared. Just go out and do your pitch, get your feedback, improve, go again, and so forth.
Okay. Cassia?
I think my advice at this moment is that it's probably the best possible time to be raising funds for games because there is so much demand for content, particularly large companies like Microsoft, for example, are very much looking for interesting, new, different content. They're competing against other major companies such as Google and etc. There's a lot of money in the games industry right now. You need to make sure that your game is of high quality. You need to make sure that you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you need to learn very quickly. But yeah, it's a really good time if you want to make any kind of different impact with your work, with your games. Then this is a time to take a chance, as Anat and Antonia say.
Leena?
I just want to say that I'm very happy that I'm amongst this august company and that I'm actually made a game. I'm actually an outsider who's just jumped into this space because of the love of it, love of what it can do. And like Anat says, just do it. I've actually just done it. And And I'm just waiting to see what one can explore in this space. But of course, like I'd say, be well researched. It should be very thought out, your processes, what you're creating, and the social impact, though it's hidden. How can it be immersed into the space? It has to be true to the platform. It has to be a game first. And I just hope that this is not called a diverse game genre long, and it becomes mainstream soon. That's only got something which I'll be wishing for.
Great. So that was actually the last question. And we are about 5 minutes early. So well done.
There are lots of questions.
A lot of questions, I think.
So I'm going to pick a random question from the audience. Let's see what the audience have prepared for us. Interesting. Let's pick a top one. Okay, first one. Let's see who it is. Ashish Khanna. Hey, Ashish. Thank you for the question. So, social impact games can sometimes feel preachy. How to get your message across without making it seem like that? Go ahead.
I would say you're using the game mechanic, not words, like show, not tell. Like it'll come across as preachy if you're making, very sort of heavy commentary within the game. Don't do that. You want to be the way that games such as This War of Mine and My Child Labour Sworn is then using, in the example of This War of Mine, the survival, resource management, game mechanics to show you how it feels to be a civilian trying to survive a war-torn environment. And My Child Labour Sworn doesn't tell you all about how terrible that children of Nazi soldiers are treated, like in Norway back in the day. It shows you by bringing the child back from school saying, I was bullied. They called me this thing. What do I do? What do I say back to them? And then you're having to make the choice as to what advice you give the child. That is way more strong. It's way more a deeper, immersive experience using those kind of methods rather than just saying what you should be feeling like. And again, also marketing is really important as well. How you market your game. If you market your game as a sort of dull, worthy, you should play this game because it is good for you. No one's going to play it. You should be marketing your game as it's like, it's got this kind of fun mechanic or interesting. It looks cool. It is interesting, and this extra thing is like, it's like shows you how it's like to be a civilian war. Like that's the kind of approach you'd be taking, for sure.
Anyone else?
I think that if you can use humor, do that in your games, because I think it is sometimes helps tell a story in a much lighter way, if that's possible. Of course, it depends on the game you're developing. But humor is a great way to connect with people and, make them want to stay, laugh, entertain, and so forth.
Great. I found a great question for Antonia. So this question is by, mind me the spelling, Ayush Kashyap. Hey man, or someone. Thank you for the question. What are your views on games that portray against wars, like This War of Mine or Valiant Hearts? Also, any suggestions that we as developers should keep in mind while developing games like these?
Okay. Also This War of Mine, and Cassia has mentioned it several times by now, is an amazing game. It's an amazing project. Very brave as well to tackle a topic like that through a lens like that, because it basically sits against all the conventions of war storytelling in games. Because traditionally it's often we play the hero and we run around and we blast our way through sort of more or less faceless enemies and so on. So there's a very established narrative. And this game has rejected that entirely and said, let's do something entirely different. So a big step, and I'm so glad they got it funded and they got it done, and it's done in a very, very well done way as well. So doing games like this, I think, means walking a fine line, because we don't want to be depressing. And this game has moments where you just, we all shared the experience, Tsahi and I talked in the past about it, that you can't play this game for hours. There's a point where you just reach your saturation point and you say, I need a break of this, or I'll just sit here crying for the rest of the night. So it challenges the player in a different way as well, not just us as developers. And we have to take that into account. So we have to take our players by the hand and watch out for them in the process. So we describe that, we call it duty of care. And I can say from my own experience, we're working at the moment on a simulation which is leveraging a lot of neuroscience and psychology to make our players walk along a very fine line of being really at the edge of their stress limit, but not tipping over. And that means the whole time we have to have regulatory mechanisms in the game. We have to feel, when do we give them sort of a chance to simmer down, to cool down, to have a break, to then crank it up again, to never let totally go, but also to never put them over the edge. So duty of care, I think, is for me a very, very important point. And it's the same for all games, but it's even more extreme when we look at virtual reality, because the level of immersion we're working with when we're developing in VR is so much deeper, and the natural barriers we have to distance ourselves from the experience are really outmaneuvered by the technology. So having a sense for how do my players feel? Where are they now? What can I take? Where do I go too far as well? Or where do I go too far in my storytelling, for example, in the representation of violence? What does it really take to get the message across? And to very carefully design that with the player in mind all the time. I think that's sort of the most important for me when looking at games like that.
Okay, and last question from the crowd by Sajan. I think language is a key to connect the cultural aspects of a game with each individual player. So in that case, to what extent the social core of the game can impact when played across countries, and how a game design can overcome this conflict of not playing with our own regional language.
Well, if nobody else wants to take this one, I have at least an experience to share on that. We developed a game that was very, very word-driven, so lots of dialogues, and it took us ages to get the wording right. So we were really creating wordsmithery, twisting every word 5 times before deciding how to phrase things. And then the organization that was using this game for training started using it in-house, and then suddenly they decided they were working in Afghanistan. And they said, this is such a great training game. This is about conflict management and conflict analysis. Let's do this with our local partners. So they started using this game with a group of pretty much local Afghan project managers who had hardly ever seen a computer before. So the game mechanic, luckily, was really simple. It was point and click, very much in line with the old adventure games. But of course, it was all in English, and there was no translation. There was no localization of this. And we just thought, oh my God, this is never going to work. Yeah, this will be such a disaster. The feedback was, it still worked. What they managed to get out of it was not necessarily exactly one-on-one what we put into it, but because it was an experience, it sort of superseded language. It told its story in the pictures, in how people were positioned towards each other, in the things you did, in how you discovered the situation. And that, I think, is the specific power of games, that it doesn't depend on accurate descriptions and words, but it is an all-round multisensory experience.
Yeah, I would say don't put as too much word, too much text in your game, because frankly, gamers would read it. If they wanted to read that much, they would read a book, and it's also costs a lot of money to localize get the game, all this text translated into all these different languages. So there's so many ways in which you get around putting text, like huge blocks of text in your game. You should try and avoid it. Okay, I see that we are out of time completely. So thank you all, dear panelists. Thank you, the audience, for hosting us, and see you later. Hey, Manisha.
Hey, thank you so much, Tsahi, Leena, Anat, Antonia, and Cassia for this brilliant conversation. It was really very good. And I hate to be the one to wrap up this panel because it could just go on and on. There have been excellent questions from the audience and lovely contribution from all the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So I've shared a feedback form in the chat box. Look forward to your thoughts on this. I'm sure you love the session. And over to another session on applied games. So if you go on to the Durga Puja mystery, so there's Zinia Taylor and Satyajit Chakrabarti over there. So look forward to having you over there. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.